security.
Okay, recording. Okay, we're starting. Welcome, I'm Edwin Rutsch. I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm the founding director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and also part of the XR, Extinction Rebellion Empathy Circle work group. And we're here today with Roger Hallam. We're here to discuss your book, your vision for addressing the climate crisis and the role of empathy in that. And your book is Common Sense for the 21st Century. Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. So let's just go around and introduce our Empathy Circle participants. Just very short about yourself. Marta, would you start?
Sure. So I'm Marta. I'm originally from Portugal, but I live in Cork in the south of Ireland. And I'm finally a PhD student in science and related to climate. And I help do the, in XR with the empathy cycle, spreading the method and training people in that.
Thanks. And Karolina?
Hello, my name is Karolina. I'm based in Gdańsk, north of Poland. I am member of local XR group, but also Global Support Regenerative Culture working group and Empathy Circle team with Marta and Edwin.
And Roger, would you like to say a little bit about yourself to start?
Sure, yeah. Well, I was an organic vegetable farmer for about 20 years, and then I went out to London and done 5 years of research on effective mobilization and campaigning. I was one of the co-founders of XR, and I've been mainly involved in strategy stuff in the UK, and in recent months more involved in mobilization and how to build movements.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's broadly what I do.
Yeah, great. And so thanks for taking the time to join us for this Empathy Circle. This is a different type of conversation or discussion. We use the Empathy Circle process. So in this process, one person is going to be the speaker. They're going to select who they speak to, and you're going to share a little bit on the topic of your book and your vision and how empathy relates to that. And whatever is alive for you too, you can talk about whatever just comes to your mind. So everyone's free to do that. They'll be speaking, they'll share a little bit, and then you want to pause, give the listener a time to reflect back their understanding. And you want to kind of check that you've been heard and understood to your satisfaction. And then you can say some more and then get a reflection. We kind of go back and forth like that for up to 5 minutes, or until you feel like you've been heard to your satisfaction. You can say, I feel fully heard, and then it becomes the listener's turn to become the speaker, and they select someone, and the process goes back and forth like that for the time allotted, which is going to be 2 hours we're going. So, so with that, see, am I forgetting anything? I think that's it. So it's pretty straightforward. So the best thing is just to kind of jump right into it. Oh, we'll get 5-minute turns, and Martha's going to be doing the timekeeping. So she'll hold up a watch there when the 5 minutes is up. And at that point, you just want to kind of wrap up, finish your thought. You'll get a final reflection. Then it will be the listener's turn to speak. So I think we're ready to start. Whoever would like to start, if you wanted to start, Roger, or sort of anyone can you just select who you're going to speak to, and you get 5 minutes.
Okay, so yeah, well, I guess I should start, shouldn't I? And I'll talk to Martha then, if that's okay. And as I understand, you want me to talk for 5 minutes. And so we're broadly talking about the Common Sense book. So I might just jump off and get a copy to remember what I wrote, in case I've left out a sort of vital bit. But yeah, I can give a little introduction to it. First of all, I guess that sort of makes sense. And the book came out of the strategy process that was created for the April 2019 rebellion in the UK, to sort of kick the whole thing off in a big way. And in January of that year, I produced this long stream of consciousness sort of ramble about how to get the whole thing on the go. And several people said that it was really good and it should be made into a booklet. And to cut a long story short, that sort of turned into a sort of short book. And various people edited it for me and said it should be published. So I said, yeah, well, that's fine. And then it was, and it's been published in the UK and US and one or two other places.
I want to give Marta a chance just to reflect that.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Tell me to stop.
So the book came sort of out of the strategic preparation for the rebellion of April 2019, and you sort of had it together in January. And people saw it, thought it was good, and so then they sort of helped make it get published, and that's how it came about.
Yeah, that's right. So you want me to carry on?
Just carry on for your 5 minutes, yeah, and then you just.
For my 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think what I want to say is what I usually say at the beginning of whenever I talk about the climate crisis, which is there's no point. You're just not going to understand, what's in this book or what Extinction Rebellion does unless and until you understand the full emotional horror of what's happening to the planet and what the implications of that are for human societies, i.e. the collapse of human societies, and understand what the collapse of human societies means. Because it's always a little bit of a euphemism, like you've read some sociology book or something. It's like social collapse. So what does that mean? And what it means, of course, is astronomical amount of human suffering, and that's an extraordinarily difficult reality to take on board, of course. And there's millions of people around the world in the process trying to get their heads around that. But the fact of the matter is, there's a geophysical system which is, subject to the laws of physics, and the upshot of it is if you put carbon into the atmosphere, it warms up the atmosphere, and we're at 415 parts per million, and we've more or less got locked in 2 degrees centigrade of global warming, and we've also melted 70% of the Arctic ice. So a recent paper said that would result in the whole of the Arctic melting in the summer in the next decade or two, or certainly by 2050. And if you know your science, then you know that once that happens, you're looking at weather chaos. I'm going to stop there. Yeah.
So you wanted to start it the way you often start these, is telling people that unless they actually look at what the situation is, not just from the cognitive perspective of the scientific facts, but unless they actually engage with the emotional reality of the level of destruction and suffering that is coming, that is already there, but also that is coming, then it's really not going anywhere. So people need to engage with the information. And so you're also saying that looking at the numbers and the science, it's a reality, and that reality is that 2 degrees are already locked in, and we're looking at the ice being fully melted within the next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's different opinions on when the ice will be melted in the summer, but it certainly could be in the next 10 years. And certainly the last scientific report said it will certainly be done regardless of what we do by 2050. But you could pick a whole load of different scientific papers. The point is that we need to focus on the reality of the science. The science isn't open to negotiation any more than the law of gravity is. So yeah, that's the starting point, is to look in a mature way, in an adult way, at reality, physical reality, rather than pretending that we've got some option on that one, because we don't.
So it's you know, people might put where the comma is slightly different, and different papers will have different numbers, but overall the reality is the same, and you can't really escape it. Is that there's great danger and this is happening and we need to act now according to that. Is that it?
Yeah, yeah, there's no really avoid it. You can't avoid it, full stop, period. Right? That's the point. There's no negotiation with physical reality, as we've discovered with coronavirus. It is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no point in trying to pretend it's not happening. It's better acknowledge it's happened and now act accordingly.
Yeah, I think the point is we can pretend as much as we like, but that's not going to stop it happening. That's the central point, right? Yeah. Sorry to be pedantic.
No, that's good. so that it's that there's no point in fudging it. It's happening, and so it's taking it.
Yeah.
Okay. Edwin, may I speak to you?
Okay,
please?
listening.
I'm just going to spend 5 seconds just getting hold of one of my bucks. So it's not like I'm hearing. Okay.
Suppose first of all, I hope Roger can hear us. I want to express gratitude for Roger to come and join us in experiencing an empathy circle. I'm a deep believer that this method has a role to play in Extinction Rebellion, in activism, in other activist groups. I think this method is important for ourselves, as you know, to resource ourselves in our work, and because it's not easy, but also in building community. And I think it embodies a lot of the principles of Extinction Rebellion. And so as I've been promoting it and teaching it and lobbying for it, I'm really excited that Roger is here to experience it, because I think empathy circles, you can talk about them, but unless you've actually experienced it, it's a bit abstract. I'll stop there.
Okay, so you're wanting to express your appreciation to Roger for taking part in an empathy circle, because you have a real belief in the importance of doing this practice, and you see that it really has a role to play in Extinction Rebellion. And you can kind of be talking about empathy circles, it's one thing, but then to really experience it is another. So I think you're having some appreciation that Roger is actually willing to experience taking part in an empathy circle.
Yeah, and there's something as well about, I think it helps with facing the reality. I think empathy circle helps with many things, with facing the reality, with a shift in culture, with, you know, there's this either or thinking that we tend to have, like, I'm right and you're wrong. And of course there's the scientific facts and the reality of it, not omitting that. But I think it's important to find spaces where people that disagree can still communicate in a civilized and constructive manner, and can connect from that emotional place that means we can actually process information and make progress.
So you're just seeing the importance of having a place where people can connect with each other, and where they can connect maybe across differences. And you know, you need a space and a place for that. And maybe you're saying that empathy circles are a place for that to happen.
Yeah, and I've been very impressed with, it's not always easy, right? Like, not everyone, we've not grown, most of us, in an environment that values vulnerability, or like it's very countercultural in some ways. But then, for example, you know, I could talk for hours on this, but for example, the calls that I host for the Global South with Karolina, where we've got, you know, like I'm here in Cork in Ireland, and I get to be with people in Australia and in Uganda and in Malawi, you know, and we're all talking about our pain to do with the climate crisis in real time. And it's not just the facts that I read on the news or on the scientific papers, but it's the reality of these people. And so yeah, I could talk about this for hours, but I just feel like these have a really important role to play.
Yeah, there's sort of like the facts is one thing, so the empirical facts, but there's also the facts of how people's real lived experiences, maybe the feelings and so forth that they're going through. And you're connecting with people in XR all over the world, and they're sharing those personal experiences. And I guess saying that those is relevant too. So those are a form of facts too, people's lived experience.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm adding something there, but that.
No, that's it. And then there's also an element of a lot of my life, I thought like trauma would decrease with generation after generation, right? Our parents I'd hope that we're doing better jobs than our parents did, and so on and so forth. And that was a bit the way I looked at the world. And I'm afraid that's not going to be how it's going to play out. And so I look to empathy circles and empathy cafes to help support us in going through that. That was my time.
Oh. Yeah, so you were thinking initially that trauma would kind of lessen over generations or over time, and you're seeing that maybe that isn't so, but you see that empathy circles, what we're doing here, is a way to sort of address trauma. And
yeah, I'll just say it isn't so because of the climate and ecological crisis, because of what's going to come. So I think trauma is going to increase because of that.
Oh, okay. So the trauma will actually increase because of the climate issues and crisis, and that's going to be a future cause of trauma.
Thank you, Edwin.
Okay, great.
Very hard.
Well, I'll speak to Roger. And I'll start off, I had a couple of things just about appreciation for your work that I wanted to start with. And the first one is I appreciate you're wanting to bridge the sort of the left-right divide. I saw an interview you did with, I think it was Hallam Baker, and you know, you're just talking about, hey, we need to overcome this polarization to address the climate change. It's not going to be a left thing or a right thing. It's going to be the different sides coming together. So that foundational view of seeing the importance of bringing people together, I just had appreciation for that.
Yeah. So what you're saying is one of the things you were drawn to was that I was on this show and talked about overcoming the divisions between the left and the right, particularly in the context of the climate emergency, and that's quite an unusual proposition, I guess you're saying. Is that right?
Yeah, and you were kind of advocating for that, and that's something that we advocate too. You know, it's like, hey, we got to bring the left and right together. And we've done mediations between the political left and right, and so I felt the real resonance there in terms of, you know, what you were advocating for. Because I just really value that.
Yeah, so there's a similarity in our approaches that you know you're seeking to gain some connection between left and right people through the empathy process. And I'm trying to do it in a similar, I'm trying to do a similar thing, I guess, in terms of what it means for the climate crisis, for the need for us to come together on some level.
Yeah, and the other part is, like, we're going to be talking about your book, but I kind of want to make the advocacy for empathy within this movement. So I'm just going to sort of forewarn you that I'm kind of moving, like, hey, what you're kind of the work that you're doing, you know, I support it, you know, I appreciate it. But there's a piece, the empathy piece, I think is really important too for that vision. So that's kind of the position I'm coming from.
Yeah, so you think it's good, the work that I'm doing, and an additional sort of aspect here is the importance of creating empathy and creating a processes around that.
Yeah, and the other part that resonates, you know, I appreciate is that you've talked about design, that you're a social movement designer. And, you know, I'm very familiar with human-centered design. I don't know if you've kind of looked into that, but there's human-centered design, which is you design any service, product, movement, organization. There's a whole tool set around how do you do that. And I've just seen that you've sort of coming from a design, you know, mindset. And so I have real appreciation for that design mindset as well.
Yeah, so you've been very involved in human design and are attracted to the whole concept of design in human affairs. And you can see that that's something that has been a big part of my own work in designing social movements.
And there's the Bay Area where I'm at is like is a real hub of the human-centered design movement. At Stanford, the design school, you know, organizations like IDEO are really pivotal, and they're here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And their model starts with empathy. You know, first you empathize with what the needs are of people. You define the problem. You bring your creativity to bear, you know, on that. You create a prototype, and then you test it, and then you start again in an iterative process of empathizing again and defining. So it's sort of this iterative process. And so I really feel grounded in that part, in that design process, and empathy is central to that process.
Yeah, so the design process, as you understand it, has empathy at the center of it, because you're trying to understand the human situation, I think you're saying, and the process of doing that is to have iterations. So you go through a process of having an empathetic sort of look at what's going on, and then design things around that, and then see how they work out in an empathetic way, and then reiterate, and then move forward. So it's based upon human experience, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And so the other part is just the importance of empathy for sort of movement building and community building is, so I think that's like another aspect. It's like, you write in your booklet about bringing the different environmental groups together, and that you know, you got to work together with them. And I think that empathy between the different sides is really important. So another piece where empathy is important too, for the internal group as well as intra, you know, group too. Still there, or?
Yeah, so this is a really important saying, which is you need to build empathy. Yeah, hopefully.
Okay,
yeah,
so
I'm
I
back.
feel fully heard. That was my time too. Your video froze a little bit there, but yep, I feel fully heard.
Right.
So it's your turn now to select someone, maybe Karolina, who hasn't spoken, or whoever.
Yeah, Karolina. Yeah.
Okay, I will listen to you.
Oh, right. Okay, great. All right. Well, I'm going to sort of go through the book, I suppose. I mean, it's not a very long book, so it's not an awful. The main points aren't that involved, really. But I just thought I should say, in order to sort of situate it a bit, is this is just my own work, you know, and I don't. It's not like an official Extinction Rebellion sort of book or anything. It's my own work. I'm taking responsibility for it, and secondly, like, it's quite a hard-hitting book. And, you know, it's but in making these hard points, I don't intend to be disrespectful to anyone. I'm simply putting a point of view, and thirdly, how I see it as it's a piece of argument, if you see what I mean. It's making an argument about something, and obviously it could be wrong. You know, it's not saying something that's objective. It's making an argument. Yeah.
Okay, would you let me reflect that? So
Yeah.
you decided to speak about your book, go through your book. And first of all, you made a sort of statement that this is your own work, your own vision of the social movement, climate movement, and it's not the official strategy of XR movement. So we want to make this division, make it clear. And then you mention three elements of this book. So you mentioned about that this is kind of discussion, and you are not sure, you create some concept, but you are ready to discuss this concept. It might be, you might be wrong, you just proposing something. And there were two other points, and I feel lost in those two other points. Would you hesitate?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember them too. I think the main thing, yeah, one of the main things I'm trying to communicate is this is an argument. It's not a vision. It's not, I'm giving reasons for why we should act in a certain way. And as such, of course, it could be wrong because it's only an argument, but it's engaging in a rational exercise, if you see what I mean, saying this is what I think should happen and this is why I think it should happen. So it's dialogical in the sense that it presumes other people will need to take those on board. But that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, so you highlighting the fact that it's your voice in broader discussion. That's your perspective. That's how you see things, and you are ready to discuss that. It's one of the points in argument, as you said. It's an argument.
Yeah.
You use this word.
Yeah, and I would also say that I think generally for Extinction Rebellion and for the climate movements, you know, more generally, is it's extremely important to be able to discuss difficult topics in an open way, because only through that can we gain mutual understanding, and, you know, empathy comes out of that mutual understanding. But I don't believe it's useful to say that some things can't be talked about just because they're difficult. And for me, that's how you build a movement, is through having this respectful, open dialogue and giving arguments. You know, the giving of arguments for me is very important.
So you again highlighting this element of argument, you giving argument, and you believe that a strong movement we can build only through discussion of very difficult topics, very difficult problems, and through argument, as you're saying. So this is the way to build, and if there is something is difficult, we can't just go omit this problem. We have to face this problem and discuss and elaborate.
Yeah,
That's what you mean?
that's perfect. Yeah. And for me, like, what argument is not a negative thing. It's not like people falling out. It's not like having an argument. It's saying, this is the reasons why I believe what I believe, and I'm interested in how you see it. So it's a two-way process. It's not pretending that we agree. It's about you know, engaging and giving reasons for things.
So what is important, argument, it doesn't have negative connotations for you. It's something positive, something constructive that helps to actually elaborate the problem, to understand each other and to find solution. Is that what you meant?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. So I will choose Marta. Marta, would you listen to me?
Listening.
Okay. I'm happy that we can discuss your concept, Roger, because I disagree with it very deeply. And I have opportunity to speak why I stopped that.
Okay, so you're happy that we get to have a discussion, and there's some points that you disagree with, so you want to explain why.
Mm-hmm. So when I'm reading this book, I have very strong impression that I see elements of the concept that I know from Gene Sharp, from organization named Canvas, former ATPOR, from research of Erika Chenoweth and Maria Stefan. Those are concept or design to bring down dictatorship. So I see the echo of those concepts in your concept.
So when you read Rutsch's book, you're saying there's that behind it or that you see in it a lot of arguments from other writers. You said Gene Sharp and then various other names of organizations and groups, and that those relate to or are said to be useful about bringing down dictatorships, and that they come up in those contexts.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Those concepts were designed to bring down dictators, not to create a new civilization. And there are concepts of nonviolent revolution that address the whole civilization. But those I mentioned don't work this way. They are designed to bring down dictators and take a power. Such a process doesn't change the civilization. It's only replace those who are in power. And I'm afraid that going this path, we do only this. This is not what we fight for. Sorry, that was a lot.
So what you're saying is that this that what you see there, that it's about replacing a system of power like a dictatorship by replacing that by another system of power, and that it's not really that those were not meant to create new civilizations, like the situation that we have now, where I think a new civilization needs to be created. That's and then and this worries you because there's elements of nonviolence that are really important that are there, but then there's something else that is missing.
Yeah, I would say that we don't want to fight one system of power and replace it with another system of power. Actually, not. Those concepts of nonviolent movement don't replace system. They actually, the change in the system is very minimum. It doesn't create a new cultural paradigm. It's only replace people in power and maybe soften a little bit politics. That's it. It doesn't change. It doesn't make a real change in our cultural paradigm, in the whole civilization. That's what we need.
Okay, so you're saying that it doesn't really address, it doesn't really offer solutions to how to create this new civilization, which is what we need. It just says about how to replace those in power, maybe make it a bit softer, but you're just replacing the people. You're not really
People in power,
something new.
Mm-hmm.
You're not creating something new.
Yeah. So there are movements. What comes to me is Meta Center for Nonviolence with its roadmap of nonviolent movement, Gandhi Institute for Nonviolence in Rochester, yet to be named network. Main activist there is Chris Moore-Bachman. So there are such groups who try to create something. Yeah, I see. Try to create something that is about cultural change, the general cultural change. That's what I believe we need to do.
So you're saying that there are other various people and movements that you named that do offer solutions on how to go about creating those cultural changes that could help build a civilization. So they're not named there, but they do exist.
Well, actually, yet to be named network is the name of the network. Yet to be named network. I'm sorry.
Okay, so that's an example of the
Yeah,
various ones that
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I'm curious what will Roger would say to what I said. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
so you're
Thank you.
curious of what Roger will say in response.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel heard.
Okay, I'll speak to Roger then. Is that okay, Roger? Wow, that was a lot of information. And I know nothing about any of that. But I can see how what we're trying to do, and by we, I mean all the different people that are trying to create change in all the different ways that they're doing it, is really too large for most of us to fully grasp. I'll stop there.
Yeah, well, you were unsure about the details of some of those points, but what you want to say was broadly it's difficult to grasp all the change that is needed.
Yeah. And that it'll so one thing that came to mind when you were speaking earlier about arguments, although I grew up in Portugal, I went to German school in Portugal, so I had a bit of an unusual experience of life, and so that education, it was very much about making arguments in the sense of you can discuss almost anything as long as there's a logic behind, even like in analyzing poetry, it'd be, do you like it or don't you like it and why? And then you'd go and you'd get all these different reasons from why, but you'd analyze a verse and end up writing write 4 pages, but all those 4 pages were full of bits and bobs that you get from here and there. And even in chemistry, it'd be like there's these 4 different formulas, compounds, which of these are you going to use in your radiator, and then you'd have to pick one, but then you sort of justify why the different components, why would it make sense. And so it's just a different cultural thing that I don't think everyone gets, of more important than being right or being wrong in a way is having thought going into whatever you're saying.
Yes, so you're saying that there's a problem with arguments because you can make arguments for anything, and I'm sort of hearing that that's potentially a little bit arbitrary, and what's more important or equally important is the thought and maybe the spirit in which you make them, or something like that.
I think maybe I didn't explain. It was a lot of words and maybe it wasn't very clear. So I suppose I don't think they're arbitrary. I think it's important for me to say, like, this is yellow. But it's also, if I'm doing that, it might be important for me to explain, what is this yellow? And what does it mean to me that it's yellow? And, and what, like, about anything, I can argue that something is something, but it's important that I can name 5 reasons of why. So I understand what you were saying about arguments, that it's important that we make cases for something. And if we explain, people don't need to agree with us, but if we explain it in a logical way, they'll understand what we're thinking. And they'll, if it's clear enough, the 4 different reasons for why I think this is yellow or what it means to me, people don't need to agree, but they'll be able to, oh, this person's put thought into this, and they've got, you know, they've got their references, or there's a logic there that I can understand even if I don't agree with it.
Yeah, so you're saying, like, if something's yellow, then you can think of reasons why it is, or why you agree it is, and if you can make those clear, then even if people don't agree with you, you've managed to communicate what you think through those points.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. I feel heard.
So you select who you want to speak to, Roger. You get your 5 minutes.
Well, I should go for Karolina then.
Okay, I will try my best. English is not my first language, my mother tongue, but I'm trying my best.
Yeah, well, I think what you were saying raises a number of, you know, interesting points, and I think potentially it's a really quite complex issue. How to bring about change, and what's real change and what isn't real change. And I guess for me, I don't want to get into a binary of something that isn't real change and something that isn't, but to create more sort of nuance around what possibly could be real change and what possibly isn't.
So, what I brought to this discussion kind of created a lot of questions for you, and you, when you're thinking about it, you have a lot of questions in your mind, and you thinking you would prefer to look at this problem not in you use word binary a way. You prefer to not see it, as I understand, black and white, what creates change, what doesn't create change. You prefer to see that in a way what has potential to create change and what doesn't. And you see the whole thing as very, very complex issue. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I think I'd like to make 2 points about my book. The first point is that the proposition is not that you replace one regime with another regime which is effectively the same, as you spoke about in classical non-violence theory. The idea is to replace a regime of representation with a regime of sortition-based assemblies. And the argument is that that's a qualitative change in the nature of the governance system. And as such, doesn't constitute utopia, but it constitutes a substantive improvement in the quality of democratic governance for reasons I argue in the book. Yeah, that's the first point.
Okay, let me reflect that. So you're pointing that your concept, the concept in your book, shows the process that doesn't just replace, as I describe it, people in a power or regime by another regime, but you proposing to replace a regime will live in with the organization based on sortition, participatory democracy based on sortition, and you see that as substantial improvement in social life, politics.
Yeah, and the reason for that is that if people are selected randomly, like through sortition, then you first of all get ordinary people into making decisions about our collective life, and secondly, it can't be corrupted by money, for instance, because people are selected randomly from the population. And maybe thirdly, like you you get a you get an accurate sort of cross section from the population, so it has democratic legitimacy. So all those three things make it attractive. You know, it might, as I say, not be utopian, but it's certainly a lot more attractive arrangement than, you know, just going back to some form of power hierarchy, as you might say.
Yeah, so you believe that political process based on sortition system creates the system that might be not utopia, but at least much better than what we have. And you pointed three elements that are very important. First, it incorporates in decision process regular people. Secondary, a random choice of participants secure the system from any corruption. And the third one, I think I lost now the third one. I'm sorry. Would you help me again?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I know. It's really tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
The third one is that because it's a genuine representation of the population, mathematically, as you might say, then it has true democratic legitimacy.
Yeah, it gives us a true representation of the whole society and all points of view. Yeah, yeah.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Edwin, would you listen to me?
Listening.
Yes, I agree that this is a very interesting perspective to create such system. But I think the system will not work without truly embraced regenerative culture, because we need to create a different alternative society and culture with different set of values, reorientated with their values and principles. And without that, this beautiful idea of public people's assembly, citizens assembly will not work, I believe. I stop there.
So you don't think that, well, it's a beautiful idea, citizens assemblies, but you think that it's not going to work unless there's sort of a cultural shift, that if the population just recreates whatever they're, you know, grew up with or whatever, that the system's not going to work. And there's some kind of a deeper regenerative culture change that needs to happen.
Yes, yes, that's exactly what I mean. Without that, we bring all the cultural patterns from the old paradigm to the new system, and we corrupt the system with old habits, with old cultural patterns. That's what I'm afraid.
So you actually have some fear that people just bring their old cultural habits and mindsets to the citizens' assembly, and that'll create a form of corruption.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what it will be, but that's what sociology and history shows us, that we try to create new system, but the old one affects culturally the new one. And in this sense, it corrupts the new project.
So you just think that history or sociology shows that, you know, these try to make these changes and all the stuff that you're bringing from the past kind of corrupt the present or future.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is that this old cultural paradigm we want to change is in us, in me, in my own behavior. And I have to start with myself, with my community, and I have to go beyond my XR group to the society, in corporate society. We have to start with ourselves because it is in our own habits, in our own patterns, mindset, mindset. Yeah, it is
Yes.
there.
So you think that we need to individually sort of change ourselves, our own mindset, and kind of reach out to to everyone, kind of really, and it's going to be
Yeah.
it's going to take a personal transformation.
So that's bring me to the different nonviolent movement concept that is based on constructive program. And when it's typical Gandhian vision, constructive program, which might be alternative society, regenerative culture, culture of empathy, in my understanding. And when we try to build this culture, this alternative, we will face the resistance of this old system. And this is the moment for NVDA, for nonviolent direct action, civil disobedience, that is truly legitimized.
So you're kind of referencing some Gandhian methods for sort of making this personal change, and that when you sort of embody it and try to bring it out into society, you'll get resistance, and that's where you see nonviolent direct action kind of being helpful, useful.
Yeah. When our constructive program faced the resistance of the old uh, cultural paradigm, economic culture, civilization, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the old system is going to sort of resist sort of a new way of thinking.
Yeah. And I see in this constructive program, okay, my last sentence, I see in this constructive program things like regenerative cultures. For example, we already do this Regen one-on-one program. I see it in work that reconnects. I see it in deep adaptation, very important element. And I see it in empathy circles, in culture of empathy.
So you see manifestations of that new way of thinking, and these different empathies or culture of empathy and work that reconnects and other sort of practices. So you're just kind of referencing those.
Yeah, thank you. I feel
Okay,
heard.
great. Now speak to Roger. Hi. Yeah, so the question I have is, you know, having read your book and you've gone through all the different chapters, I haven't seen like empathy mentioned. So I'm like, I'm wearing empathy. You know, those are 3 rows of books all on empathy, and I've interviewed most of the authors. So I'm just wondering where empathy, you know, the value of empathy rests in your works. I haven't seen you sort of explicitly mention it, so I'm just kind of curious about that. So I'll just start with that.
So empathy is the big thing for you, or
Right.
a big thing, and you've got your 3 rows of books, so you're quite passionate about it, and you feel like, where was that in the book? You read it, and that was a question for you, is how does
Yes,
that fit in?
exactly. So I hope maybe hear some of that. So yeah, I am very passionate about it. I do see it as what you're talking about with the citizens' assemblies. I think I have more faith in people. If you have citizens' assembly and people just listen to each other and empathize with each other, sort of like we're doing here, we're willing to take the time and space to hear each other, that really will, you know, create the best solutions out of those citizens' assemblies. So I have faith in people that, you know, if they can hear each other and learn some basic skills, you know, empathic listening skills and sort of an empathic mindset, I have hope and trust in people, because I've seen it over and over again that, you know, when people just listen to each other, hear each other, you know, understand each other, that they kind of come up with constructive ways forward.
Yeah, so you're saying, like, you've seen in people's assemblies and similar sort of events, people having empathy for each other and making connections and being able to communicate effectively. And you've seen that many times, so you've got hope and belief that this can work in practice through those sort of situations.
Yeah, and so what I really appreciate about your work is you're very strategically, you know, thinking strategically and willing to get out there on the streets and do something. You know, it's like, you know, we need a revolution. We got to get out in the streets, you know, do the nonviolent direct action. And I agree with that, because, you know, if we just say, oh, please, can we have a more empathic society and listen to each other, you know, we're not taken seriously, you know, or as well as for climate change too.
Yeah, so you're saying you appreciate that you do need to get people on the streets and engage in that sort of political action. And I think what you're saying is, you know, that's part of it, but and at the same time, there's the empathy part of it's important too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the empathic action, you know, we have this empathy tent we take out to the left-right battles in Berkeley, you know, the left and right are beating each other, and we listen to both sides. We try to mediate between the sides. So just in terms of strategy, you know, I would like, you know, I'm kind of moving towards, we take the empathy tent set up in the, you know, Washington, D.C., just like you're talking about in the book, go to the capitals and then do direct action. But the demand, one of the demands is that the left and right have empathy circles with each other. And we insist that they take part in empathic dialogue to, one, bridge the divide, because the polarization is gonna kill us if nothing else.
Yeah, so you think like a crucial part, and maybe you're implying this is sort of missing, or it is, it's not in the book anyway,
right,
is that part of the, you know, proposal to the government, as you might say, or to the powers that be, is that people engage in empathy circles or similar procedures that basically bring people together, so people listen to each other, and progress is made, as you might say, through these ways of communicating.
Yeah, and you did mention in your book that the dialogue is important, just so you have reference that. I would kind of add that it's an empathic, it's the style of dialogue that's important. And another thing is like there was the people from the policy exchange that were very critical, you know, of XR. They wrote a piece, and it seems to me a way to deal with critics is insist that they take part in an empathy circle. Like there's the two authors of that article. Like, can we say, hey, come take part in an empathy circle? Want to hear your point of view? Let's have a public empathy circle where we actually listen to each other. So not only do we have the politicians, you know, doing what we're doing right here, but we also have the critics, like the policy exchange, the two authors, you know, take part in an empathy circle.
Yeah, so you're saying, like, an example is with policy exchange, it said very critical things about us. An appropriate response would be to invite them to engage in a public empathy circle so they could understand our point of view more through that process, and vice versa. We could understand them and what their concerns are, and that's what you'd like to see happen.
Yeah, I feel very well heard. Thank you.
Oh, or you back to me?
Back to you. You choose. Whoever you wish.
Well, Edwin, I'll speak to you, because
Okay.
I could reply to a few things. I mean, I could go two ways with this. I could try and engage a little bit with what Karolina has said, but I could say a little bit more about what the book's doing. So I'd like to return to some of Karolina's themes, which I think are very important, and what you've mentioned as well. But I think it's worth saying a little bit more about the book, particularly if people are watching this, just so we've laid out the territory a little bit.
Yeah, so
whether
you're going to
that's
lay out the territory of the book, kind of go back to that and give sort of the territory overview.
yeah, and just so we know what we're talking about in its potential limitations. And I think how I see the book is like with all books are limited. And I know this is a bit of a get out clause, but it is also true that I'm sure if you've all written stuff, you always have that feeling at the end that it's incomplete, which it always is by the nature of being finite. And I was aware that with this book, I wasn't trying to deal with everything. I was trying to make a particular proposition about a method of political change. In other words, you know, what Karolina said, the MVD element of it, what that looks like, how to design it, and how to make sure it was successful. And I wasn't sort of thinking that that's everything. You know, it's a thing and it's important, but it's not everything.
Yeah, so you're kind of giving the context of the book, kind of saying it's so the scope of the book, you can't cover everything within that scope, and the scope is really looking at NVDA and sort of that aspect.
Yeah, and I think the specific aim of the book, I suppose, was to try and make people serious about the horror of the situation we face, and through that seriousness, look at seriously at what actually needs to happen in terms of political confrontation at this particular point in history.
So you really want in the book, kind of the intention is to have people have sounds like a felt sense or a sense of the horror of what can happen, and in feeling that horror and take it seriously. So create sort of a feeling of seriousness too around it.
Yeah, and that seriousness enables people to seriously consider what that political confrontation is necessary. And then my next point is to actually design that political confrontation within the theory of civil disobedience, which is to engage in disruption and sacrifice while maintaining a respectful orientation towards the opposition. In other words, to situate my design within the mainstream of what you might call Gandhian or Martin Luther King's civil disobedience.
So you're trying to create like a sense of seriousness, see the horror of what's happening, and then because of that, you know, once you have that, then you can see that it takes serious action to have that motivation to take maybe that serious action, and that action is based in Gandhian nonviolence. Sort of, yeah, I think that's what.
Yeah, and at the same time, I know it's a little bit of a get out to say your book can't cover everything. So I think that's sort of valid, but I sort of think it's not valid because you do have a responsibility to cover, you know, cover a number of bases. And I would accept Karolina's criticism that, and your implicit criticism that it could have gone into greater detail about the constructive program, and I'm familiar with Gandhian civil disobedience, so it's not like I don't know what you're saying. And there could have been more about that. And you know, when I have my next 5 minutes, I can give a slightly different slant on how I see it. But what I want to communicate is that because it wasn't in there doesn't mean that I'm not empathetic, as it were, with the empathetic argument. I am. I have a particular take on it, but I don't think we've got a big difference, and it'd be good to sort of investigate that difference. But it's not like I don't think it's important, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, it's like there's sort of a scope to the book, and you're just covering what you could cover. You can't cover everything, and so you didn't go into the vision part of it so much, and the role of empathy, even though you think all that's important, and you have all that you're dealing with, but that wasn't in the scope of the book. And you're going to go,
yeah,
maybe go into the vision later. Or...
I mean, I'm accepting that it's a valid criticism. That's what I'm trying to say. You know, I'm not I'm not pretending this book is like, it's not God, right? It was a particular point at a particular time, communicating particular information, and as such, obviously, it's got flaws. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying that I'm hearing that the book has flaws. You're not. It's not God, and it's yeah. There's more to it than is in the book.
Yeah.
Okay. Then thanks. I'll speak to Karolina.
I think Marta didn't speak for a while.
Okay, then I'll speak to Marta. If you,
It's okay, I don't mind.
yeah, yeah. I had spoken to Karolina because I thought maybe she hasn't spoken in a while. I didn't want to pass it around. So if she says it's you, then it works for me. So if you can reflect that part back.
Yeah, so if Karolina says it's back to me, then you go with that.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of you know, I don't expect Roger's book to cover everything. You know, I don't have that expectation. I don't feel like it's really criticizing that I'm saying, hey, your book's not covering this. That's why we're having these conversations. I see the book as sort of a conversation starter, and yeah, let's talk about it and let's build on it. So yeah, I don't see it as like sort of a criticism per se.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying you don't necessarily see it as a criticism, that you're saying, you know, the empathy and all that's not in it. It's more as a conversation starter. You don't expect the book to cover everything.
Yeah, and I think it's also a chance to, you know, share where we are too. You know, we've been doing a lot of work on empathy. We've been in XR. We've been holding empathy circles. We've done the 10 principles of XR. You know, we have a series of empathy cafes, you know, using this process. So we've really been trying to spread this practice within XR which I think can be a real contribution. And so this is just part of what we're doing here is I think just trying to contribute to XR in, you know, promoting empathic dialogue and sort of an empathic mindset.
Yeah, you're saying as well, part of it is also us explaining what we've been up to within XR, trying to promote empathic dialogue. There's the empathy cafes about each of the principles and the various works that we've been doing to spread that culture.
Yeah, and looking at how can we do that, and one way is, for example, you know, there was comments around the Holocaust comments that Roger, you know, had, and it just created a big hoorah, a lot of conflict around that. And I would have liked to have seen an empathy circle around it, a public empathy circle where the people could just talk with each other, the German XR, the Jewish XR, etc. Could have just had a public empathy circle to sort of dialogue about it. And I think that would have modeled a constructive way of dialoguing within the movement.
Yeah, so you're giving an example of a situation where you wish empathy circles would have been used. So in this case, about the whole Holocaust comment, and you wish that the various opinions there had been heard using this format.
Yeah, and it is, as well as with the XR US, XR America, there's a big sort of split, and you know, and I know Roger took part in some sort of mediations with Mickey, you know, around that. But I would have liked to have seen some of the XR America and the XR US participants and Roger be in an empathy circle together, you know, just to have a chance to sort of more mutual empathy than I saw in those dialogues, because it seemed to be kind of like a let's all beat up on Roger circle. If you ask me, it was let's beat up on Roger. Let's have everybody be against Roger. I think that was kind of unfair myself.
So even also with the case of XR America and XR US, and there's all these different opinions, and Roger as well. And so you're aware that there were processes that happened with Mickey Cashton and others, and you wish there had been more mutuality in those processes. Using the empathy circle could have maybe provided that. And so you wish it had been more mutual and not so much, or you didn't say that, but you wish it had been more mutual and there had been more understanding.
Yeah, and I have talked to XR America, done a pre-circle, just empathic listening with one of the people there, and have invited, XR US to have these, take part in empathy circle, and so far haven't heard them respond. So it's just, yeah, so I'm sort of, what am I getting? I guess I'm harping on the empathy, we right? It's like, how do we bring more empathy into what's happening in XR, and, and in all the different contexts? How do we actually use it, for the strategies that Roger is talking about? I see it as sort of a contribution to the overall strategies, and
Yeah, so you see it has a role to play, and you're wondering how various ways it can be employed, and you've made effort to contact different people to get them engaged, and you don't always get that, but you really would like there to be more of it.
Yeah, I felt heard. Thank you.
I'll speak to Roger, or should I go to Karolina? I don't know now. I'm confused. Who's not spoken for longer? Well, Caro then. Yeah, go on, Caro. Listen to me. So, okay. On the regenerative culture, I suppose I have something to say there. I've got an affinity group. I think one of the beautiful things about XR is its organization in affinity groups, and when you do actions, you model with your affinity group the way you wish people would treat each other, the way you wish people would take action. You prepare before, you discuss your motivations, you debrief after, you reflect, you learn. There's something very powerful about working together with an affinity group.
So you decided to talk a little bit about regenerative culture, and then about the very specific element of regenerative culture, which is how affinity group function in XR. And you express how much you like the way the affinity groups work. They prepare to the action, they discussion, they prepare emotionally, they create specific, I don't know how to say that, oh gosh. Well, they actually, through the whole process of preparing to action and until the debrief, there is a specific culture of doing it, and you like it very much. You appreciate that that in XR exists something like that.
Yeah, and it's important to say regenerative cultures. I'm very aware of that. Okay. I also named that at the moment we're doing empathy circles and empathy cafes on things like earth emotions, like intersectionality, and like all sorts of topics. And I think doing it about topics of oppression and all sorts of other things that have an emotional charge to them is really important. Because where I want to go with the regenerative cultures bit is that I'm tired, I think that's the emotional way of putting it, I'm tired of this idea that regenerative cultures is that little thing that happens in that little corner in XR of the fluffy people that are on unicorns. Like it's some form of, it's the people that are into therapy or self-work or whatever. I know I'm a bit, there's this resistance to regenerative cultures that I want to talk to.
So you want to address the resistance in a movement to regenerative culture. You observe this way of thinking about regenerative culture like something additional to our actions, to our main activity. This is something that should help us to do our main activity. This is something additional. And you believe that this is very important what we are doing in Empathy Circle, because we during Empathy Circles discuss not only those 10 principles, but also things that strictly topics about regenerative cultures, plural, like help me with pronunciation, please. Intersectionality and other element, earth emotions, and all this, all the topics that are in this complex, which we name as a regenerative cultures.
Yeah. So basically, I see regenerative as opposed to degenerative. You know, so all the growing food that we do as activists now, we're sort of guerrilla planting things, or all the ways in which we engage our politicians. I mean, for me, the way I see it, citizens' assemblies are part of regenerative culture. You know, the way I see it, it's part of circular economy. For me, is part of regenerative cultures. You know, caring, the culture of caring is so it, you know, basically, sorry, Colleen, it's a lot, but my message is basically, I think regenerative cultures is not this part that is over there, but I think we need to make everything else sit in regenerative rather than degenerative.
So you understand regenerative in opposition to degenerative, and for you is important that everything, that regenerative culture is not something there over there that helps us to be activists, but something that we are kind of immersed in, full immersion in regenerative culture in everything what we do. It's a part of everything what we do. That's what you mean?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you, Karolina.
Okay. So I will choose Roger. Roger, would you listen to me? Yeah, I'm glad you brought that, Marta, because this is very important problem, and I agree that People's Assembly and Citizens Assembly are part of regenerative culture, and actually everything what we do in a movement, we should perceive in terms, is it a regenerative culture or not? Are we regenerative or not?
So you agree that citizen assemblies and people's assemblies sort of embed a sort of regenerative culture, have it in them, and the issue is are things regenerative or degenerative? That's a key question.
Yeah, in every our small or bigger action in a movement, whatever we do, it's important to find the regenerative way of dealing with everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's what is important for me.
Yeah, so it's important to find regenerative ways of working in all aspects of our activities.
Mm-hmm. But it may be more like NVDA, because Edwin, Bill, me, and Marta, Bill Filler, who is not here, we will, mostly it starts with Edwin, the idea, we develop idea of empathic direct action. And we have this idea that we can create massive nonviolent direct action that is actually empathic direct action.
So you can see regenerative cultures being embedded in direct action as well, and that direct action can be empathetic. It's structured.
Yeah, we actually trying to imagine a mass of everywhere on the streets and on the squares people doing empathic listening in circles, in pairs, however they want. They engaging bystanders. I have it in front of my eyes, such an image, such a vision, and I think it might be a switch of the way we perceive our movement is perceived.
Yeah, so you think if people engaged in empathetic circles in the actual collective act of civil disobedience, then it would affect how people perceive the movement as well, the outside people.
Yeah. But we need to train facilitators, and we start doing it on as many as possible for doing that. Yeah, I stopped there.
Yeah, so that's why you're training facilitators with a view to this idea actually happening.
Yeah. But I would like to change a little bit topic, and I would like to talk about the global south in our XR strategy, because this is for me something that is painfully missing in our strategy. I don't see the global south really incorporated into XR movement strategy.
So you want to change the subject a bit because a concern you have is that the global south is not integrated into the broader strategy of Extinction Rebellion.
But I suppose my time is almost up. Is that right, Marta?
You have half a minute.
Well, that I will say that for now I'm completed. Thank you. I feel fully heard. Risen. Your turn.
Back to me. Is that right?
Yeah, your turn.
Okay. So I'll talk to Martha. Yeah, well, I want to communicate something which is a little bit more philosophical, but I think it's quite important, which is that however we speak about the world, we use words and concepts. And I think a key part of individual growth or cultural growth is to understand that all concepts and ideas are an approximation of reality, and they never adequately grasp reality. And the implication should be that we need to have a certain humility in not ever thinking that we can fully define reality through the words we use.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to take it maybe a bit philosophical, but it's to say that the words that we use to describe something, we need to be aware that they're only ever an approximation. And so we need to be humble about doing that.
Yeah, and there's a particular tension, which is we need to be quite reductive about the world and make categories and what have you in order to understand the world. But the very act of creating categories sort of separates us from the world, because the world is fundamentally can't be split into categories because it's all interconnected. So we always have that, damned if we do, damned if we don't sort of, approach to reality. And I think that's something that we just have to work with. I am not aware there's a solution to that problem.
So you're saying that there's a problem that you've not found a solution to yet, that to articulate things or to express the world, we need to put handles on things, and those handles are going to be reductive in nature. And so we're going to put things into categories because that's the best we can do, but it's not ideal.
Yeah, and I think to get to the point is, I think that's a problem with the concept of regenerative cultures, is that on the one hand, it's really good to identify there is such a thing as regenerative cultures, but in the very act of creating that binary, as you might say, between regenerative cultures and the rest of reality, as it were, you sort of undermine the whole point of regenerative cultures, which is that regenerative cultures have to be embedded in practices across the sphere, and as you rightly say, not sort of separated off as something that, you know, exists in some weird separate sphere of reality and everything else is separate from it. So I'm sort of empathizing with that frustration that you have, that as soon as you've identified it, you have sort of damned yourself in a way to sort of some sort of separation. So there's a conundrum there, which I wanted to identify.
Yeah. So you're describing how this is a problem, because if you name something as a regenerative cultures, and yes, you say things would fit into it, then you created a binary, and then there's the things that are and things that aren't, and by doing that in itself, you're falling outside of the regenerative culture, because regenerative culture would mean that you wouldn't need to do it; it would just be embedded. Is that it?
Well, I think you do need to do it, because you need to establish there is a thing called regenerative culture. So what I'm trying to say is there's no ultimate solution to this, but there is an appreciation of the problem and a working with the problem. And I think that awareness of the working with the problem actually helps is core in a sense to what regenerative culture is, which is to acknowledge the fundamental ambiguity of language and reality, which then creates an opening for empathy. Because for me, like, the opposite of empathy is certainty, you know, to know that you are right and someone else is wrong. And that's a major problem, as hopefully we all know. Yeah.
So the big thing about regenerative cultures is actually realizing the conundrum, and part of it is to actually the empathy rather than separation, either or, is the central piece. Is that it's not I'm right and you're wrong, but it's all that is. I missed the formulation there. Do you want to repeat that? Sorry, Rutsch.
Yeah, well, I think the main point I was making was that the acknowledgement of the limitations of trying to describe the world is a core element of regenerative culture itself, if you see what I mean, because it creates that humility and openness to the world rather than a sort of closedness.
Yeah, so it's the part of the regenerative cultures is that it can't describe, we can't describe the world, and but it creates a certain openness, you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Edwin?
Mm-hmm. Listening.
I think one thing I want to name as well is that it's really tricky. I think I said it earlier, but it's that most of us haven't, like, to be here doing an empathy cycle is an incredibly privileged thing to do. You know, to actually, like, many people have never in their lives actually experienced being listened to. I'll stop there.
Yeah, so you're seeing that what we're doing here is a privileged activity, because a lot of people just haven't really been heard and haven't been listened to and been heard.
Yeah, and as I want to take bridges and do empathy cycles on them, I also realize that there's a certain degree of vulnerability that one tends, you know, might be unnamed, and it doesn't need to be named necessarily, but there's a certain degree of vulnerability that we engage in to do these empathy circles that many people might have very good reasons not to engage in.
So you think that taking part in these empathy circles has a certain level of vulnerability, and that might be a reason people don't want to take part? And they're legitimate, or I think you were saying legitimate.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying earlier, like I had lovely parents, but they don't speak on a non-violent language. And it's not that they don't want to, but it's because their parents didn't do it. And so they mean well, but the things that come out of their mouths are not, they're not regenerative sometimes, you know, and I have it easy. And so I suppose what I want to say is that there's, that I can afford to remain present and listen to someone that is, for example, saying something racist or something that I deeply disagree with. I can do that, but I don't necessarily expect everyone to first time around be able to do that.
So you're able to have the presence to listen to someone who you would see as perhaps racist, and because you have sort of the capacity to do that, but you can have understanding for people that don't have the capacity to do that for whatever reason.
And there's things that are easier for me, you know, because of my experiences and my history than for others. And so it's, but rather than focusing on the individual, I suppose it's how can we as a movement help each other, that we can learn how to co-regulate and we can learn how to soothe each other's nervous systems so that we grow our capacities to do things differently from what we've experienced in our lives so far.
Is it sort of like you're saying that how do we sort of support each other in being able to listen and hear each other, have the capacity to listen to each other?
Yeah.
More deeply, perhaps?
Yeah, not just cognitively, but that we can, because when I listen to something I don't agree or to something that is difficult and hard, I will get triggered. So my whole chemistry will go all over the place. And so it's, how can we help soothe each other? Like XR does that, right? With singing, we do it with all sorts of things, with de-escalation, but it's that I think it needs to be very intentional for us to remain nonviolent. I suppose that's where I want to get to. For us to remain nonviolent, we need to continuously practice this as if it was a religion. You know, the nonviolence, it needs to be practiced. Empathy needs to be practiced. Growing our capacity to listen needs to be practiced. We won't just wake up one day, do a half-a-day course on it and be able to do it overnight. So
we need a sort of this ongoing capacity building to be able to listen to others within XR. And it needs, so you maybe have some intentionality to it and some commitment to it and sort of an ongoing development of that capacity to have the space to listen and hear each other.
Yeah, and just a last thing to say, because we're going to need it, basically. I just think, you know, we need it now for the sustainability of the movement, but also we're going to need it in the future that is coming.
Mm-hmm. So you just see the real need for it to keep the movement going and in the present, as well as for society in general. We're going to need that capacity, and yeah, the importance of it.
Very hard.
Great. I'll speak to Roger then. Yeah, I wanted to somehow get back to the core concepts that you were talking about, and I'm not quite sure if I remember them clearly. Yeah, so well, let's see. Yeah, well, I know I have the kind of the outline of your book. You know, I kind of laid that out, and the first part, you start off basically saying we have to deal with reality. You know, we have to deal with what is. And I think that's what you were talking about before is, you know, we have this vocabulary, these words, and we're not dealing with the pure reality. Maybe it's the words don't totally match up to reality. So yeah, I guess I'm just kind of thinking a little bit here. So if you try to make sense of that.
Yeah. So you want to get back to some of the core concepts of what I was writing in the book, and you're not totally sure what they are, just thinking about it. But like, it seemed like one of the main ones is the need to get back to the sort of core reality of what's going on.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the things is that the core reality is just not facts and figures. You know, there's the physicality and the measuring of physicality, but there's also the reality of felt experience. Like you know, right now I feel sort of spacious. I feel calm. I feel kind of warmth. I feel a sense of warmth for everyone here. So this is sort of, there is a reality to my felt experience here in the moment. Just as there is facts and figures of you know, the parts per million of carbon, etc., or whatever.
Yeah, so you're saying like there's two things. There's the facts and figures, there's core physical reality, parts per million and what have you. But then there's the reality of lived experience and human experience and how you feel. And, you know, so for instance, you're feeling calm and connected and what have you in this moment. So that's how you see lived experience.
Yeah, and there's sort of the aspect of the humility of, hey, I don't have all the answers. I think that's what you're kind of saying. You know, we have to sort of be open to, hey, you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I had an impact that I didn't intend. So you got to have a little bit of humility about, you know, the certainty of what we're advocating for. We're saying we got to have a regenerative culture. Well, maybe I've heard criticisms of regenerative culture too. So, you know, be open to maybe regenerative culture isn't quite the way to go. Let's open that up for question. I didn't hear the it wasn't a criticism here of regen, but I've heard just recently, I saw Karolina's head kind of nod, so putting that comment in there. She looked kind of skeptical there for a second.
Yeah. So you're saying like a big part of this is having the humility of going, hey, this is my point of view, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe something I believe in a lot and quite passionately about, maybe it's not the whole story. And using the example of, you know, you're really into regenerative culture, but who knows, you know, maybe there's a problem with it or it's not quite right. And that's important to have that awareness.
And I think that my position is we need to be willing to have a dialogue about it. No, it's by sort of having this empathic dialogue and really taking in, like I hear you taking in. I mean, you're able to reflect back, you're taking it, and I really feel you're understanding where I am, and you may disagree with it, but sort of this process, this empathic or dialogic process is kind of where I have my hope and faith in. That, you know, given enough time, no matter who the people are that are in conflict, that we'll sort of be able to find some kind of mutual understanding and probably even connection.
Yeah, so you're saying you understand that I'm sympathetic to that orientation about using empathy circles and this whole approach, and your belief is that if people stick it out and go through that process, they will find some mutual understanding.
And I guess one of the sort of the things I'm kind of pushing for in this dialogue is, hey, Roger, how about we incorporate this more into the overall movement? You know, what's about some strategies we kind of laid out some, you know, you're very influential in the movement, you're a spokesperson. You know, what do you think about these ideas and how can we kind of build those into, you know, kind of steps going forward? So that's kind of part of where my drive and enthusiasm is.
So your drive and enthusiasm is, do you think these ideas and these approaches could really help matters and what I'm hearing is you're trying to do a little bit of lobbying.
Exactly.
you think if, through this session you might get me to see the light almost, and you know, get the whole thing on the go in XR, and that'll be a good move.
Yeah, spot on. And I'm willing to consider that I'm wrong, and I'm willing to dialogue about it too.
Yeah, you might. Yeah, you're into dialoguing about whether dialogue actually is the be all end all.
Exactly. I feel
paradoxical sense.
Exactly. I feel fully heard.
Yeah, okay. So it's me again, isn't it? Yeah. Karolina then.
Yes, I will listen to you.
Yeah. Well, I just want to identify that as another philosophical paradox, while we're being philosophical, which is you can be very dogmatic about not being dogmatic. And you see this quite a lot, that people who are very idealistic end up being quite unpleasant because they're so obsessed with how right they are that everyone should be nice to each other, that they actually turn into not actually being that nice. And again, there's not a total resolution to that as I see it, in the same way as, you know, that's a sort of parallel to the epistemological sort of problem that we identified, you know, with not being able to totally describe the world. But I think it's the same. It's not actually possible to be totally ethical in that sense either.
So you're describing kind of philosophical paradoxes and problems that you said you can't be dogmatic about being dogmatic, if I repeated that correctly. But you mean that you particularly mean people who are ideally stick visions, and they of mutual understanding each other and being nice to each other. And if they become dogmatic about it, actually they stop being empathic. So this is the paradox, and the same paradox happens in epistemology. We can't fully name everything. That's what you mean?
Yeah. Or the more we try to name things, the more we fail in a sense, because we need to have words cannot encompass reality.
So you mean that the more we try to be precise in naming things and problems and issues, the more we lose kind of control over those processes.
Yeah, and I think I'm not being philosophical just for the sake of philosophy. I think what's important here, for instance, is and this is where I have I engage in a sort of critique of extreme empathyism. And one of the criticisms that I see of it is that there's limited time. And I think Martha mentioned this, is there's only so many hours. And so there's only so much that can be done without undermining other activities that are crucial for interpersonal social health, if you see what I mean. And I think one of the things in Extinction Rebellion is sometimes people spend too much time talking and not enough time deciding, for instance. And the act of decision is different than empathy. Though, again, I don't want to, yeah, so that's that bit.
So you made this all introduction not just for philosophy sake, but actually you wanted to make a parallel to empathic extremism, as you describe it. So that's how you see that we can't be extremist in empathy because we don't have time, so much time as we would like to have. And you see that sometimes we spend too much time talking and not enough time to making decisions and making some progress. We don't have much time. I feel like you
Yes.
want to add something.
Well, just to slightly amusingly say that I can't say what I mean because I've got run out of my 5 minutes, which sort of illustrates the point. So obviously I'll be coming back at some point, but yeah, the time is a great limiting factor in everything, as we all know.
So yeah, you're noticing actually we have exemplification of this problem right now because time is up for you and you perceive that time is very important factor in all this situation. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's what I meant, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So who didn't speak for a while? Help me, guys. Marta, you didn't speak for a while? Yeah. Marta, would you listen to me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So, yeah, I believe that time is the very important factor. And I have experienced that if we have emergency state, I was rescuer and technical diver, and I have been sometimes in very difficult situation. And my experience is that if we are in emergency situation, we actually need to move in the very slow, systematic way. Don't rush. Kind of behave like nothing happened. We follow the rescue procedure, but we need to be kind of very steady in our movement. Do not rush.
So what you're saying is, from your experience as an emergency worker and a diver, it's that in an emergency situation, actually what you've experienced is this problem with time, that it's really important to remain stable and to be not necessarily slow, but to be
Not rush.
intentional. Not
Yeah,
rush,
intention.
exactly. Not rush. Be
Yeah, not
intentional, not
rush.
rush.
And intentional, yeah. And I love what you said, Marta, about in former round, you were talking about culture, and my constatation is I want to connect that to what I was saying about building culture, regenerative culture as a constructive program. That to make those people's assembly and citizens assembly effective, we need to build culture that is able to make this change and make this change effective. I deeply believe in it, that it has to happen not from up to down, but from down to up. So first we need to create culture that is able to make this shift to different political system. That's what I believe.
So you're saying that that it's really important to make to make that shift, that to a new system, a new political system, a new way of being, that it's really important to embody the regenerative culture into the process of actually doing those citizens' assemblies. That needs to come first.
Yeah, so there is a cultural shift in us that we are really able to embrace the idea of citizens' assembly, participatory democracy as a whole.
Yeah, so it needs to come from us, that we embrace this idea of participatory democracy, and then it can go somewhere, but that needs to come first.
Not from the revolt in power, but from the grassroots.
From grassroots up rather than from up from
Yeah. And I'm horrified by the fact that there is no time to talk about the Global South, which I believe is a very important element, because I know it's simplification that Global North is polluter and Global South is the victim, but that's how I see. When I simplify this problem, that's how I see it.
Yeah, and so you're horrified that we now don't have time to talk about the Global South, and you think it's simplifying, but that there's the Global North that's got blame on pollution, and Global South that is the victim. And so
yeah. And the whole strategy we have is very UK-centric, Euro-centric. It's not strategy for Global South. It doesn't work there. So we didn't create strategy that is useful for the whole movement in planet's terms, planetary, global movement. That's how I see it.
So you see XR strategy as being very Eurocentric, and so not being fully universal.
Yeah, the simplest example is our strategy. We have different conditions and different police attitude in UK or even in Europe, yeah, thank you, and different in Global South. Another thing is lack of social security, healthcare system in those Global South countries that we have. We have a lot of privileged security people in Global South don't have, but they will suffer horribly from global climate crisis.
So you're naming that that things like a strategy of arrest and doesn't work the same in both contexts, and also things like social security do not exist in the Global South in the same way, and so you are saying that really they're going to suffer the most, and a lot of the strategy does not apply to that reality.
Yeah. I have to stop there. I would like to say more, but I have to stop. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we all want to say more in terms of the time. I just want to keep us, we had committed to 2 hours. I can go longer, but I don't know how everybody else is. So
how much time have you got left?
We have about 2 minutes before the 2 hours is over. So I don't know how you are on time. If you want to go over a little bit, do you have any?
I've got to go at 8, unfortunately. Yeah, but
okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, but I think can we give Roger last comments or something?
Yeah, if you just take final sort of comments, sort of wrap up, any thoughts,
whatever you
anything.
feel you want to say.
Without reflection. Yeah.
Or with, if you want.
Or we can give you a reflection too, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's all right. I'm not going to say it's all rubbish and then disappear or something. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate having the 2 hours to sort of focus on something which I think is very important, and as we've all acknowledged, wasn't really dealt with in the book, you know, partially legitimately because it's limited, but partially it's a valid criticism that it's a critical part of the whole mix, as you might say. And I would personally respond to Edwin's lobbying to say that, I think, you know, empathetic practices, more broadly speaking, are central, and I've been totally convinced of that ever since I did mediation and got people to, you know, listen to each other by actually speaking what the other person has said. I think it's a revolutionary mechanism of connection, and there's not that many things in human affairs which are revolutionary. I mean, I think non-violent direct action is, and I think deliberation is, and I think mediation, that sort of empathetic technique is. Those are my top 3 that I've discovered in my 53 years of existence, you know. And the other thing I'd like to say is that I agree with the whole general sort of stream of our conversation, which is that regenerative culture, if it's to mean anything, has to be embedded in practice, and that practice is across the movement. You know, so for instance, like having empathetic circles in the midst of non-violent direct action confrontation is an excellent idea, as it is in having it embedded in conflict. So, you know, just to reply to the things about the Holocaust comments and the problems in America, I fully support having empathetic communication as part of a mix, as you might say, of different things that could or should happen. And I think it's a tragedy. I mean that word in a strong way. I think it's a tragedy that politics is so, I see, pathological, really, in its inability to entertain the necessity for empathetic communication, and it's very sad, particularly in radical politics as well, which I think in many ways just replicates the politics of the mainstream in its, you know, in its privileging of dogma, as you might say, you know, justifying of dogma. And as I hope I've tried to communicate, you know, one of my main orientations is to be opposed to dogma, including my own, which is why I've said with this book isn't it's not a dogmatic statement of absolute truth. It's a self-conscious projection of a point of view that I don't necessarily totally agree with, but I'm putting it out there as a dialogical invitation, you know, for people to read, and part of a collective process of you know, moving forward through collective intelligence, as you might say. So yeah, I mean, that's it.
Okay, well,
that's all
great.
I'm gonna
Thank you
say.
so much. Yeah, it was a real
Thank
pleasure
you.
to talk to you, you know, to take time to, you know, whole 2 hours to do this. And so I'm really
Yeah. Well,
grateful
I want to thank you all for inviting me. It's you know, it's always a great honor for me to be involved in XR activities. It's not something I take for granted. You know, I was a organic farmer who never met anyone hardly for 20 years. So it always feels a little bit peculiar when I get invited onto things. I want to hold on to that peculiar feeling and never take it for granted. So, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, Marta.
Martha, did you want to
words?
say something?
Thank you.
Go?
Yes, I'd like to make a final lobby. So every Saturday, 6 to 8 p.m., we've done Principle 5 yesterday. So we did Reflecting and Learning. We welcome everyone and every part of everyone next Saturday. But we're just going to run them. And then once we finish, we'll start doing them in Australia.
Australia, Asia, for different times.
And we'll do all these other ones. And I just think it would be nice if you joined a big one, you know, just show up like everyone else, one time, surprises. And I think it would be a nice thing because you'd experience it as part of the wider group. It's the same. So you'll have like 40 people on it, but we still go into little breakout rooms. So you'll still have a facilitator with, it'd be like this, but there's a beginning with everyone and the debrief at the end with everyone. So maybe yes, maybe not, but it would be nice to see you one day on one of those.
Yes.
And I really appreciate your participation today and the sharing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of you for taking the time as well. And I really appreciate all your efforts. It's difficult work doing what we're doing in this time, isn't it? And so I really appreciate all your efforts. Thanks.
Okay, good. Have a good
Thank
rest
you.
of the day. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Stop recording.